Apple has added new privacy and security prompts in macOS Sequoia. I always forget what the name of this macOS is, by the way. I'm always happy to get that information whenever I receive it, which is reading
Strange
your
for
articles.
a California Bear trophy holder not to know, though.
Yeah, because nobody won. It's the reason that we both have the trophy.
So we both won. We both won.
That's true. So new privacy and security prompts in the latest betas of macOS require weekly reauthorization of any app that can capture your screen. There is currently no permanent authorization that can be given, so you can't say, hey, just stop bugging me about this. And this adds what I would say is another stone on the pile of dialogues that Apple has been adding over the years, which I know has been a bugbear of yours. We've spoken about it many times. So you wrote a great article about this on 6 Colors, but I would like to go talk about why. Why would Apple add a weekly security dialogue to a screen recording entitlement, or if you would call it that, or API?
Well, so one of the things that I tried to do in my article, which is called Apple's Permissions Features Are Out of Balance, is I didn't want to write what I kind of desired to write, which was an angry screed about Apple getting in my way and get out of my way and this is my computer. Because the truth is, Apple's motivations are good. Apple's motivations are that capturing your screen is a huge invasion of privacy. And if somebody can either talk you into authenticating, that's how malware spreads. The number one way malware spreads is that it's social engineering, at least Mac malware. Number one, I don't know. It is a very common way where somebody calls you or you are told to call, you text them or whatever. You end up on the phone with an expert. They have you install software. They have you put in your password and stuff like that. And now they're in your computer, right? Like that's super dangerous. Also, abusive relationships, people who have access to one another's devices. A person who is an abuser in a relationship might choose to, or, for whatever reason in a relationship, but like I think a common case is abusive relationships, to have surreptitiously installed software, monitoring software on a computer. So the problem is if it happens once and then it's there forever, that's really dangerous. So I'm sure the motivation here is you got to ask them again later, because outside of being talked to by a social engineer or outside of the surreptitious installation of the software on your device, if you get a prompt that says, did you know that this thing can see everything you do? Are you sure that this is a good idea? At a later date where that person is not around or that person is not on the phone, it's an opportunity for Apple to say, hey, you might not want to keep giving this permission. It's very similar on iOS. There's a lot of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like I would argue too much, actually. I haven't gotten into that, but like I am very tired of being randomly prompted if my weather app should know where I am or if my Maps app should know where I am. Mm-hmm. Similar kind of thing. And this comes to the truth of it, which is good motivations. I think all of these scenarios, should software know where you are? Should software see your screen? Absolutely. You should be made aware of it and not just in the moment. The problem is that in macOS Sequoia, they're literally saying approve for 1 week. Mm-hmm. And at no point am I, as the user, so far as I can tell, given the opportunity to say, actually, I'm okay approving this forever now. And I can see scenarios where like permanent approval at the moment that you install it is dangerous for all the reasons I just outlined. Mm-hmm. We're going to ask again later. My problem is it seems to be that in this cut of beta, I'll grant them, beta of macOS Sequoia, what the only power they're giving the user ever is to just kick the can down the road for a week, which I have a couple problems with.
A week is wild. Yeah. A week is wild.
It is wild.
Like I think they've done a decent job with some of the iOS prompts, like the location prompts and the photos prompts. I don't know what their timeline is, but they pop up every now and again, and I think they do okay.
part of my issue is at some point as the user, as the owner of the device, I do want to be given the authority to say, stop asking me. The answer is yes, right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to say, hey, dummy, I do want Google Maps to know where I am. Stop asking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that you can't. And again, I'm not saying you have to do it right at start, but eventually, after you get past that initial thing where you're like, oh, they might not know what they did, let's ask them later. As the user, I need some recourse that is not ask me again in a week. And there's two reasons for that. One is, well, there's many reasons. It's a terrible user experience. It gets in your way. And often it gets in your way when you're trying to do something on your device. And then it says, oh, hey, by the way, this thing is going on. Or if you're trying to do screen sharing in your office meeting, in your company meeting, and suddenly it's like, oh, by the way, do you want to approve this thing? Which is the worst possible time to ask. Mm-hmm. It also leads to permission fatigue, where people just say yes, which makes sense. Security people hate this, right? Like, oh, why do they say yes? Well, it's like, if they say no, they break their software, right? If you say no, I've had this where a thing has come up and I'm like, do I want this? It's like, well, I'm trying to do something right now. And if I say no, I know it's just going to break and I'm going to have to go to system preferences and turn it back on. So I guess I'll just say yes. So you just overwhelm people and they don't want to break their stride for what they're doing. And then I would say not given enough focus is, I think Apple, whether intentionally or not, is trying to drive a wedge between users and their software. And I hate it. Mm. This is the thing where it's sort of like, oh, you want to use that software? Well, we can't stop you, but every week we're going to warn you that you shouldn't, essentially. And you can give it another week, but eventually you're going to give up. Like, well, you can do this. How long? You know, who's going to outlast who? It's like a staring contest. Mm. Who's going to outlast who? Well, guess what? The operating system is a computer. It will never stop bugging you if it's programmed that way. And I don't like that. I don't like that it is Apple programming its operating system to bug users and basically say, hey, don't run software outside the Mac App Store. Hey, don't run that program that uses that API that's useful, but we don't want you to run it anymore. Hey, you over there. And it's super gross and bad. I'll throw in the other thing that they changed, right, in Sequoia, which is Gatekeeper, which is what happens when you launch an app for a first time. And if it's not notarized by Apple, a system that used to be completely neutral, but that Apple has weaponized in the EU for iOS, makes me feel much less charitable toward Gatekeeper and toward notarization. The first time you do that on Sequoia, it directs you to system settings, and you have to approve the idea that you could possibly open software that isn't notarized by Apple. And then when you double click on it, it's going to give you another warning, and then you have to authenticate, and then it will finally launch this app that is a program you installed and want to use, right? Mm-hmm. Theoretically. Mm-hmm. But worse than that is the language they use, because the language they use is scary language. It's Apple can't vouch for this thing because we couldn't scan it for malware, and we can't say whether it's safe or not. And again, I think the attitude that Apple has with this is attempting, intentionally or not, to drive a wedge between users and the software that they use. And with the ultimate goal of saying, if it isn't in the Mac App Store, don't trust it.
Why can't they do the scanning on the device? Like, the scanning that they do for notarization that confirms there's no malware, why can't Apple just do that to any software I download?
What they're doing is the notarization includes a signature. So they scan it for malware on the server, but it's also got a cryptographic signature on it, which means that the app that you're using, they can verify is the app that they saw.
Right, but like,
it hasn't been modified. So they have to see it for that. You're right. They could potentially do some of the scans that they're doing.
It's an automated process, right? Mac notarization. Right. So like, why can't whatever they need to do to sign it? Why can't my device do that? Now they can't sign it, and they shouldn't sign it. But in theory, they could verify it for malware if they wanted to.
They could. They could, but they can't sign it. They have to have the one that's on the server so they can
Yeah.
verify. And I think what they want to do is they want to verify that the one that's on the server that they're signing is not full of malware.
Yeah. And
Anyway,
I do support Mac notarization. Like I do think that if you make a piece of Mac software, you should get it notarized, like because it seems like it doesn't harm you in any way, and like actually is better for even your customer support, right? Like if you offer a piece of software, people are going to be emailing you, be like, I can't launch it, you know?
Yeah.
Like it is.
Yeah, but that's because but that's because of a barrier that erected by Apple.
I know.
In order to get people to notarize their software.
I know.
I agree. Notarization on the Mac is harmless, at least so far.
Mm-hmm.
And the apps that aren't notarized, I don't know why they're not notarized. I don't think that the ones that I've tried are for malware. I think it's for reasons of either not wanting to play with Apple, play Apple's game, or feeling like Apple might reject them for content, which I don't think they would actually do. I don't think Make MKV, which is a basically DVD ripping software, I don't think it actually would get not notarized. I think it would be notarized, but the guy doesn't want to do that, and it's like, okay, fine. But anyway, so this is my issue here is. It's the same thing we've talked about, over the last few years, which is people who say at Apple oh God, we got to add this privacy thing, this security thing, because what if get their way?
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be nobody who is empowered to push back and say this degrades the user experience. And that's the out of balance part, which is, I went into this when I was talking about migrations, which seemed that they may have been fixed now, but you migrate to a new computer and then you have to reapprove every single app on your system. And I had people say to me, well, what do you expect? I expect a better interface for that. So I don't have 50 dialog boxes that I have to click through one at a time. I expect Apple to build something better that says, oh, you just migrated, here are your apps. Or perhaps in the system settings, there should be a better UI for this. I saw some people on Mastodon this week talking about the idea that you should be able to look both by permission and see apps, and by app and see permissions, so that you can have like a good interface to this stuff. But authorize for 1 week is the laziest, most user disrespectful thing you can do. Yep. I'll grant you it's a beta, but that should never have been put in an operating system.
This isn't a bug.
Stinks.
This is a decision.
It stinks.
Right? Yeah.
It says, again, I'm not inside Apple, so I can't say. All I can say is from the outside, Apple seems to be behaving like a company where the privacy and security people can get anything they want, and anybody who speaks up and says this is bad for the user, and ultimately probably bad for security, those people are not empowered to be heard. And so everything gets approved, that's this draconian security stuff, and there's nobody there to fight for the user and say, this is the wrong way to do it. And I blame Apple's managers, right? I blame Apple's software managers. And ultimately, I guess I blame Craig Federighi for this, because I'm not saying you shouldn't care about security and privacy, but if you're going to play that game, you also have to spend the money and the time on the user experience. They go together. You have to do both. And Apple, it seems to me, is much more concerned about the one than the other. And that leads to authorize for 1 week.
So the issue that I see here, it reminds me of something that I experienced quite a lot when I worked at the bank that I used to work at. So people that don't know, I worked at a bank for like 10 years. I left school. And I ended up in the marketing department. I was responsible for, sending out email campaigns and mailing campaigns and stuff like that. And during that time, I kind of coined a phrase in my head, which is institutional one-personism. Now, I'm not saying this is bad or good, but it is a thing that happens where every decision is met by, well, what about the one person who might get this who X, right?
Right.
So, like, for example, you're sending out a mailing campaign to, let's imagine people who are getting married, right? That they've applied for a loan, and the reason is that they're getting married. And you want to send them out a mailing campaign about congratulating them. And then someone says, but what about the person who got left at the altar? and then the entire campaign ends because of that one person. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that this is good or bad, but it is a thing that happens. And the reason I bring that up is like one of the things that you mentioned as like a reason to do this is because of potential abuse that people might receive, right? That you may be in a harmful relationship. Because of if that is considered to be important enough, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, I'm just saying if that is considered to be an important enough reason, there is no scenario in which a global approval could ever exist. Because if you have started down the process of we need to have this because people may be abused, you can never create in any scenario any kind of setting that turns off those security prompts. Because if you've started down that path, you can only get more strict with it.
Right. And this goes to the core of what a Mac is. And again, you could argue that it's different from the iPad and the iPhone. I would argue that Apple's made some decisions on the iPad and the iPhone that are also questionable, but what is a Mac? You know, and I've heard people argue over the last few days who've said to me, you can't let users make bad decisions. You can't do it. And that's wrong. And so you keep saying, I'm not going to say it's right or it's wrong, but like, I'm going to say it's wrong. Fundamentally, it's wrong. Saying we're not going to put up a sign that says Happy Mother's Day because what if they don't have a mother? Come on. Like there is a limit. I'm sorry, people. There is a limit
Jason,
to this. It is the what if one person.
I agree with you. Like
what if one person, exactly what you're saying. So this is the thing. The Mac needs to let me do what I want at some point. Am I willing to have the Mac be a little more complicated so that gullible people and vulnerable people are a little bit better protected? Yes. Am I willing to give up the ability on my Mac to do what I want, which means install software Apple hasn't seen? It means give permission for utilities to monitor my screen, even though Apple thinks that's not smart. Apple thinks I shouldn't do those things. And this is the bottom line here, which is I'm willing to be inconvenienced a little bit for the general safety of the platform. I am not willing for Apple to take my agency away and say, this isn't your Mac anymore. There are things on your Mac that you've always been able to do. We don't think you should do them. And there's no way for you to tell us otherwise. That's my problem with it. And it is, I'm just going to say it, Apple has spent so much time on iOS and iPadOS now where they have a top-down paternalistic attitude toward all of its users. For some good reasons, again, I'm not saying that they're bad reasons, that it's seeping into the Mac. And I've had people say to me, why are you guys making such a big deal about this? It's just a beta. And the answer is because if we don't scream bloody murder about it right now, they'll just do it.
Yeah. No.
The reason this will change, if it changes this summer, the reason it will change is because a whole bunch of us complained, filed feedbacks, got John Gruber to write a post about it, all of these things, for somebody inside Apple to say, I told you this was a mistake, and have some manager who didn't care and didn't think it was a big deal because users are stupid and we should just not let them do things, say, okay, you're right, I guess that was too far, and fix it. I should also mention, as a footnote here, I've also heard from people who, including some people inside Apple, who say, I think there's actually a new API that does this stuff that doesn't trigger this thing. The problem is, one, I've heard other developers say it actually does trigger this thing. Maybe it's a bug. I don't know. Two, why is there a approve for 1 week in any scenario, even for an old API? And three, I talk to developers who don't know what's going on. They have no idea. Is there like a special approval, a special entitlement that Apple can provide? Nobody seems to understand it, which comes back to the original point, which is, so who's up on this? The security and privacy people clearly can do whatever they want, but like developer documentation has nothing. The user experience is nowhere. And you're just out of sync. You can't run an organization like that. Those three groups need to be in lockstep You need to have good UX for your new security and privacy settings. And if you're making changes that developers have to build, you need to tell the developers, here's what we're doing. We're going to give you a warning. If only there was some sort of developer conference that they could hold at the beginning of the summer to talk about this and make it clear to developers what's going on. But unfortunately, nobody is capable of such a thing.
In Discord, Zach says, it's a shame they have nowhere to tell all developers worldwide
Worldwide.
changes like
It
this.
is
Maybe a
some sort of conference. It is a tragedy.
Look, the beta thing doesn't work because there wasn't a bug in the computer that wrote a dialogue that said 1 week, right? Someone made a decision, but like it is a beta, yes, so feedback can be collected, but if you complain to people that are talking about this, this is part of the feedback process. Like year after year after year, this is what happens. Things happen in iOS or macOS. People write about them. We talk about them on our shows, and it helps drive some people to make different decisions. Like this is, I think, at this point, an accepted part of the beta process that we're all a part of together. And I will say, like you mentioned iOS again, and I will just say, like I think in general they have done a really good job with iOS prompts in the last few years. Like they're providing visual context to the thing that's happening.
I never get the thing that I do on the Mac where I do one thing and I'm prompted with 8 different things.
No.
Right? That never happens, which is good.
And also, like, they seem to find good time. Like, so, for example, you get these prompts on the home screen when you're not doing the thing, where it's like, hey,
not doing the thing, which is huge.
WhatsApp
right?
has access to your photos, and it shows me my photos. That you want to continue. Like, I think that they need to do that, right? So, for example, you know, it's like every now and again on the Mac, it pops up, and it's like, hey, it shows like a little screenshot of my desktop. And says, like, these 5 apps have access to this. Would you like to manage that? Like, that's the way to do it. But, like, do it, you know, whatever. I don't know what the intervals are on iOS, but they feel better than this.
Right. And I would say also, ultimately, I need to be able to go somewhere at some point, not right away, and say, stop asking me about this app, right? I need to be able to do that. I think you're right in general. Like I said, I mentioned the example before, which is, my frustration on iOS and iPadOS is also there are certain apps that I want it to stop asking me. And sometimes they do. I think it's hard because it's a progression. I think maybe you get that. I think maybe you get the location approval, and then there's the sort of like when I use it or all the time that you get eventually, but you don't get it at first.
They still check in after a while, though. Like it is a progressive thing when you're like, no, this is fine, and then you can say whenever I'm using this app or just like all the time.
Because that bugs me when they put up the map. I'm just gonna be blunt here. When they put up the map that says, "Oh, your weather app showed you your weather where you were." And look at this map, your weather app. This is the driving a wedge thing. I know they think of it as disclosure, but this is them saying, Carrot Weather is spying on you. And like, okay, if I'm unaware, that's great. But as a user of that app, at some point I need to be able to say, never tell me this again.
Yep.
My weather app knows where I am. Yes, thank you. Stop asking me. They have to. That's just good user experience.